If someone had told me that a single weekend would destroy everything I had built in 22 years of marriage, I would have laughed. I wasn't some reckless woman chasing attention. I was Emily Carter, 45, a senior associate at a law firm, mother of 2 grown kids, and wife to the most loyal man I'd ever known. My husband, David, ran his own auto shop. He was steady, honest, the kind of man who fixed everything that broke in our house, but somewhere along the way, we stopped fixing each other. Our marriage had become predictable, comfortable, but painfully quiet. Every night, he came home smelling of oil and exhaustion, ate his dinner, watched television, and drifted off on the couch. I loved him, but I felt invisible, like a piece of furniture in his life that never moved or mattered anymore. That's when Ethan Blackwell came along. He was my boss at the firm, sharp, charming, confident, everything David wasn't. He noticed things. My new haircut, my perfume, the color of my nails. He'd lean in close when we worked together, his voice soft, his tone flirtatious. I told myself it was harmless. I even laughed when he called me the most graceful lawyer in the building. But those words hit a place in me I hadn't felt in years. He made me feel seen, alive. When he asked me to join him for a weekend retreat to discuss a high-profile client case, I hesitated. He smiled and said, "You deserve a break, Emily. Call it a girls' trip if you need to." And that's exactly what I did. I told David that the women from the firm were planning a short beach getaway. He looked up from the TV, half listening, and just said, "That's nice, Em. You need it." He didn't ask who was going or where. That indifference hurt more than I wanted to admit. I convinced myself that he didn't care, that maybe he wouldn't even notice if I was gone. The morning I left, Ryan helped me load my suitcase into the car. "Have fun, Mom," he said, smiling. I kissed his cheek and told him to behave. I didn't realize then that it would be the last time he'd look at me with trust in his eyes. The trip wasn't with the girls. It was just Ethan and me. The hotel was right by the ocean, a private resort with white sand and quiet rooms that overlooked the water. We checked in as co-workers, but within hours became something else. That night, under the sound of waves and wine-induced laughter, I crossed the line I never thought I would. It didn't feel like betrayal then. It felt like escape. Like I had found a version of myself I'd lost somewhere between grocery lists and laundry piles. Ethan whispered things I hadn't heard in years. How beautiful I looked, how special I was. He made me forget who I was supposed to be. When I returned home 2 days later, guilt hit me harder than the ocean wind ever could. David met me at the door with a tired smile. "How was it?" he asked. I forced a laugh. Just what I needed. Lots of shopping and gossip. He nodded, kissed my forehead, and went back to tinkering in the garage. I stood there watching him, realizing he'd never even questioned my lie. That should have been a relief, but it only made me feel worse. Ethan kept texting after that. Small things at first. "Miss that dress you wore. Wish you were here." I tried to ignore him, but I couldn't. Every time I saw his name light up my phone, my heart raced like I was a teenager again. One afternoon, Ryan caught me smiling at my screen. "Who's that?" he asked. I said it was work stuff and quickly locked my phone, but I could tell he didn't believe me. I tried to pretend everything was normal. Cooked dinner, made small talk, sat beside David while he watched TV, but my mind was elsewhere. The texts turned into calls, the calls turned into secret lunches, and before I knew it, I was sneaking out of work to meet Ethan at his condo downtown. I told myself I was still in control, that no one knew, that no one was getting hurt. But lies have a way of cracking open at the worst times. One night, Ethan called while I was in the kitchen making dinner. I thought it was Ryan's music playing upstairs, so I answered. He said, "I can't stop thinking about you, Em." I didn't notice Ryan standing by the doorway until he said, "Who is that?" My heart dropped. I fumbled, said it was a client. He didn't push, but the look in his eyes told me he already knew something wasn't right. For the next few days, Ryan acted distant. He'd barely talk to me, and every time I asked what was wrong, he'd just say, "Nothing." But that nothing carried weight. Heavy, suspicious, dangerous. I could feel the distance turning into something else, a readiness to confront me. Then came the night everything fell apart. Ethan had come over after David texted saying he'd be working late at the garage. We thought we had time. We didn't. Ryan came home early from practice. I heard his footsteps on the stairs, his voice calling, "Mom," before the door burst open. The next few minutes are a blur in my memory. Ryan's face, frozen in disbelief. My panic, Ethan shouting. Ryan yelling at him to get out. Ethan's security men rushing in from downstairs. Everything happening too fast. I remember screaming, "Stop," as they shoved my son. Then a crash, a thud, silence. When I ran down the stairs, Ryan was lying on the floor, his leg twisted unnaturally, blood on his forehead. I dropped beside him, crying, shaking, but he just looked at me with disgust. "You're disgusting," he said, before closing his eyes. Ethan pulled me away, saying we'd handle it, that it was an accident. But I knew nothing about this was an accident. It was all because of me. Later that night, David called me from the hospital. His voice was cold, unfamiliar. "Ryan told me everything," he said. I tried to speak, but he hung up before I could. That was the moment I realized what I'd done wasn't just cheating. It was destruction. The next morning, I went to the firm, pretending to work, but my hands were shaking. Ethan sent me flowers that day, a stupid gesture that made me want to throw up. My phone rang again and again, David's name flashing on the screen, but I couldn't answer. I couldn't face him. Not yet. When I finally went home that night, the house felt different. His car wasn't there. My suitcase from the girls' trip still sat in the hallway, untouched. I picked it up, opened it, and stared at the sand-covered clothes inside. The smell of salt and guilt hit me like a punch to the chest. That's when I knew the girls' trip lie had turned into something much bigger. It wasn't just a secret anymore. It was a time bomb. And it had already exploded.
I didn't sleep that night.
I couldn't. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at my phone, waiting for David to call again, or maybe to text something, anything. But there was nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that eats through your stomach and makes you wish you could undo time. Ryan was still in the hospital. I tried to go see him that morning, but David had already been there, and the nurse at the reception desk told me, "Your son asked that you not be allowed in right now." Those words crushed me. I stood there frozen, my heart pounding in my ears. My own son didn't want to see me. I deserved it, I knew that, but hearing it still felt like someone was ripping a part of me out. I sat in my car in the hospital parking lot for over an hour before I finally started the engine. I didn't know where to go. I couldn't go home. David might be there. I couldn't go to work. Ethan might show up, pretending everything was fine. I ended up driving to a park near the river, just sitting in the car, staring at the water. That's where everything started to sink in. The affair, the lie, the trip, the betrayal, Ryan's injury, every wrong choice piled up until it was hard to breathe. When I finally went home that evening, the lights were off. David wasn't there. The house felt empty, like it had been abandoned long before that night. On the kitchen table was a single note in his handwriting. "You destroyed everything. Don't come near me or the kids." My hands shook as I read it. That was it. No yelling, no fight, no last chance to explain. Just finality. The man who had stood beside me for 22 years was gone. Ethan called me later that night.
His voice was calm, too calm.
"You need to relax, Emily. It was an accident. The kid shouldn't have been there." "Don't you dare call my son a kid," I snapped, crying. "He's in the hospital because of you." "Because of me?" Ethan's tone turned cold. "You told me to come over. You said your husband wouldn't be home. Don't shift this on me, Emily. You wanted this as much as I did. I didn't want any of this." "Well," he said, sighing, "you have it now. So pull yourself together. We can fix this. I have people who can make the story go away." That sentence terrified me more than anything. Make the story go away? What did that even mean? I hung up without answering. The next few days blurred together. Friends from work started calling. I didn't pick up. I knew what they'd heard. Ethan must have told them his version, the one where I was an emotional wreck and David had gone insane. By the third day, I decided to go see Ryan anyway. I couldn't take not knowing. When I reached his room, David was sitting beside him, holding his hand. Ryan's leg was in a cast, his face bruised but healing. David looked up at me, his eyes empty, cold. "What are you doing here?" he asked quietly. "I just wanted to see my son." "You've done enough." "Please," I whispered. "David, I never meant for this." He stood up suddenly, cutting me off. "You don't get to talk about what you meant. You lied to me, cheated on me, and got our son hurt because of your lies. You don't get to explain." "David, I'm sorry." "Don't." He pointed toward the door. "Get out." Ryan looked at me then. Not with anger, not even with hate. Just disappointment. That was worse. "Mom," he said weakly, "you ruined Dad." His voice broke. "You ruined all of us." I left the hospital sobbing, barely able to see the road through my tears. Ethan kept calling that night. I ignored him. Around midnight, I finally turned off my phone. When I woke up the next morning, I had over a dozen missed calls and one text from an unknown number that made my blood run cold. "Stop ignoring me, Emily. You forget who helped you. Don't make me remind you." I didn't know if it was Ethan or one of his security men, but I felt unsafe in my own home. Every sound made me jump. Every car that passed by made me look out the window. That afternoon, I drove to my best friend Sarah's house, desperate to talk to someone. She opened the door, and her expression said it all. She already knew. "Oh my God, Emily," she whispered. "What have you done?" "Please," I begged. "I just need someone to listen." She shook her head. "David told Mike everything. Ryan's in the hospital, and people are talking. You should leave for a while, Emily. Just go." "Sarah, please, I didn't mean for this." She closed the door before I could finish. That was the moment I realized I had no one left. Not my husband, not my son, not my friends. I was completely alone. That night, I went to the office to clear out my desk. Ethan was waiting there, leaning against my chair like nothing had happened. "I told you to relax," he said, smirking. "I'm done, Ethan. I can't do this anymore." "My family." "Your family's gone," he interrupted. "Face it. You have me now." I took a step back.
No.
"I don't have you.
You used me.
You used all of this." He laughed. "You think I risked my career for you? You were just convenient." That was the final crack. Whatever part of me still thought this was something real died right there. I left without another word, tears burning my face, and went home shaking. The next morning, I saw David's truck parked across the street. He was sitting inside, staring at the house. I almost went out to talk to him, but something about the way he looked, calm, distant, unreadable, made me stay inside. Then he started the engine and drove away. Hours later, I found out from a neighbor that he'd gone to Ethan's house that night. They said they heard shouting. A gunshot. Police sirens. I froze. My heart pounded so loud, I thought it would break through my ribs. I called Ethan's number again and again. No answer. Then finally, a message came through from David's phone. "You'll see what justice looks like." I dropped the phone, shaking, realizing this was only the beginning. I didn't step outside for 3 days after that night. I barely ate, barely slept. My mind kept replaying the sound of the word justice from David's text. It didn't sound like a threat, it sounded like a promise. I kept telling myself he wouldn't actually hurt anyone. He wasn't violent, not the David I knew. But the truth was I didn't know him anymore. Not after what I'd done to him. On the 4th morning I turned on the news, and there it was. Ethan Blackwell, my boss, my affair, my mistake, had been arrested. The FBI had raided his firm on charges of fraud, embezzlement, and possible involvement in money laundering. I stared at the screen in disbelief as his picture flashed beside a headline that made my stomach twist. Prominent attorney facing federal charges linked to criminal network. I felt sick. My hands were shaking so badly, I could barely hold the remote. I'd known Ethan had secrets. Expensive cars, quiet phone calls, clients who always paid in cash. But I never imagined it went this deep. My phone started ringing. It was David. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. When I finally did, his voice was calm, eerily calm. "They got him," he said. "David, please, You picked him over us. Now you'll go down with him." I tried to explain, to tell him I didn't know about Ethan's crimes, but he hung up. I sat there, crying, whispering to no one. I didn't know. I didn't know. By the end of the day, 2 FBI agents came to my house. They showed me a warrant. Ethan had used my name and client credentials to move money between accounts. I was complicit, on paper at least. I tried to tell them I didn't know, that I never touched the accounts, but the evidence was there. Emails, signatures, records. My name was on everything. They took my laptop, my phone, even old case files from my office. When they left, my entire career went with them. The next morning, my law license was suspended. I tried to call David again. He didn't answer. I called Sophie. She sent me a text that said, "Dad told me everything. Don't contact us again." That broke me. I sat on the floor of my kitchen, clutching my phone, sobbing until my throat hurt. For the first time, I realized I'd truly lost everything: my husband, my kids, my friends, my job, my home, and even my name. A week later, I saw David again on the news. He was being interviewed outside the courthouse as a source. He'd helped the FBI by giving them evidence, files, notes, and a recording that linked Ethan's firm to the criminal network. I didn't even know he had that kind of proof. I didn't know how he got it. He looked different, harder, colder, the kind of man who had nothing left to lose. And then, he looked right into the camera and said, "Justice isn't revenge. It's the truth finally being heard." I turned off the TV. I couldn't breathe. 2 days later, the FBI came back, with handcuffs this time. I still remember the clicking sound as they locked around my wrists. I didn't fight. I didn't cry. I just looked around my empty house one last time, at the photos on the wall, the ones with smiles that didn't mean anything anymore, and walked out. The court hearings felt like a blur. They showed every email, every message Ethan sent from my account, every transaction tied to me. My lawyer kept insisting I was manipulated, that I didn't know what I was signing, but the prosecution didn't care. To them, I was guilty by association. And maybe I was. Because even if I hadn't laundered the money, even if I hadn't signed the forms, I still played a part. I'd lied, cheated, and let myself get dragged into a world that destroyed my family. When Ethan's trial began, he didn't even look at me. He took a plea deal, claimed I knew everything, and walked away with less time on the table. A week later, he was found dead in his cell. The report said suicide. I didn't believe it. Men like Ethan didn't end themselves, they were ended. But by then, none of it mattered. I was sentenced to 8 years. The first few weeks in prison were unbearable. I kept expecting someone to come and say it was all a mistake, that I could go home. But no one came. I spent my days in silence, thinking about Ryan's face that night, about the way David's voice cracked when he told me to leave, about Sophie's text that said she never wanted to hear from me again. David never visited. Not once. A few months later, I received my first letter. It was from Ryan. Just 1 page. "Mom, I don't hate you anymore. I just don't understand why you did it. Dad's moved to a new town. I'm okay now. I hope one day you find peace, but I can't forgive you yet." I cried over that letter for hours. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. A small thread of hope that maybe, someday, he'd look at me without disgust. Sophie never wrote. I don't blame her. Years passed slowly. I worked in the prison library, kept my head down, counted days instead of years. Every once in a while, I'd hear about David through old coworkers. They said he sold a house, moved to a quiet town, started over. They said he looked happier. I was glad for him, even if it hurt to imagine him smiling again without me. Sometimes I dream about that last morning before the trip, the way he kissed my forehead without looking up from his coffee. I wish I'd told him I was unhappy, that I felt unseen. Maybe things would have been different. Maybe I wouldn't have lied. Maybe I wouldn't have gone. But I did. And that one lie, the girls' trip, became the match that burned everything down. 8 years later, I walked out of prison with nothing but a small box of my belongings and the weight of my choices. The world had moved on. David had too. I heard he never remarried. Ryan graduated, Sophie got engaged, and no one came to pick me up. I took a bus to the same beach where everything began. The ocean was quiet that evening, the same sound I'd once mistaken for peace. I stood there for a long time, watching the water, feeling the sand between my toes, wishing I could wash everything away. I whispered to no one. I said it was just a girl's trip, but that one lie cost me everything. That's the truth. The truth I can't undo, can't escape, can't bury. Some mistakes don't destroy you instantly. They eat you slowly, from the inside out, until one day, you wake up and realize you're nothing but the ashes of the person you used to be. And that's who I am now. The woman who lost everything for one lie. The woman who learned that karma doesn't come fast. It waits, watches, and then hits when you least expect it. And when it does, it doesn't miss.